Hello, my name is Laura Aguiar, and I'm a lecturer in cinematic arts at Ulster University here in Northern Ireland, and also a participatory multimedia content creator. Today, I would like to draw upon my own experience as a filmmaker and talk about how I use digital participatory filmmaking and virtual reality to make a film about the Irish border. The name of the film is Border Sounds, and the film takes the viewer on a journey across an invisible line that separates Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland. And it does that through haikus and sounds that were created by people who live near this invisible line. These are the things I'm going to be covering today. I'm going to start this presentation with a very brief overview of the Irish border, and then I'm going to be describing the process of making border sounds, and I will conclude with a reflective analysis of this process. These are some of the questions I'm going to be exploring in this presentation. I'm going to be looking at how digital technology can be used to engage rural people and make a film in a participatory way. I'm going to also be looking at the potential of VR technology as a storytelling medium. And I'm going to be also exploring a little bit post-conflict storytelling and what role VR can play in post-conflict storytelling. So Border Sounds was made during the COVID pandemic in 2021, while I was working as a creative producer for a place called the Nerve Centre, which is a creative media hub based here, and also PRONI, the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, which is a much longer way of saying the official archives for Northern Ireland. And although the film wasn't produced for the purposes of research, it can still be a very good object for subsequent reflection. As Des Bell notes, films produced with a popular audience in mind or within the commercial strictures of public service television can actually provide a very well-founded laboratory where researchers can explore both the aesthetic but also the institutional dimensions. So in discussing Border Sounds, I hope that my reflections will open up to further questions on the role of VR storytelling, particularly in post-conflict societies such as Northern Ireland. So, to kick off our discussion, I would like to play the trailer for Border Sounds. And although it's a VR film, the trailer isn't, but hopefully we'll give you a flavor of what you're going to see on screen. So this is Border Sounds, but before looking at how it was made, I would like to introduce you to the Irish border. This is an invisible line that runs for over 300 miles, separating Northern Ireland from the Republic of Ireland. It was created in 1921, and there are over 200 public road crossings touching on absolutely every aspect of daily life here. These photos, alongside the quote by Cathal McCall, capture really, really well what the border looks like today. It's more like the line in the bog, the field, the loch, the town, the townland, or even the house. And this line has divided the island of Ireland economically, politically, and socially. And those three pictures, you can actually see the border there, or can't see the border, but the border is there, I promise. There is a wealth of literature on partition and the conflict in Northern Ireland, which is also known as the Troubles, and more recently Brexit. And I'm going to be sharing some of these at the end of this presentation with you. But for now, because the time is a little bit tight, I just want to draw your attention to how the island of Ireland has experienced many processes of bordering and debordering over the last 100 years and how these impact any storytelling project today. Bordering began in the 1920s when the island of Ireland was divided into two separate sovereign states, each with its own government, justice system, and also parliament. In a nutshell, the border was put in place for many social, political, and economic reasons after a bitter war of independence that led to Ireland breaking free from English rule. The bordering process intensified a little bit further in the 70s and 80s during the violent conflict known as the Troubles. Alongside the deaths and the casualties, the conflict has also left major scars across Northern Ireland, including disablement, displacement, and high levels of trauma. The bordering begins in the 90s as a direct result of course, the strengthening of the European Union, but also the peace process and increasing cross-border cooperation. So today, if you travel between the two countries, different phone signals and road signs in miles and kilometers are the only reminders that that border is still there. However, since 2016, Brexit has placed the Irish border under the spotlight again. This invisible line is now central to many debates around trade, customs, and local economies. And given the troubled past here, any possibility of a hard border by land or soft border by sea also has implications for the peace process. As a result, what we're witnessing now is an increasing push for a united Ireland. So this bordering, the bordering context, and the legacy of 30 years of conflict add a layer of complexity and sensitivity to any storytelling project that deals with memory and history, such as border sounds. So, making border sounds, as I mentioned earlier, I made the film while I was working with PRONI and the Nerve Center in 2021. The film is the output of a creative outreach program, which is part of a much larger project called Making the Future. Making the Future was a 3-year project funded by the European Union's Peace 4 program. It was led by PRONI and the Nerve Center alongside 2 other organizations, the National Museums and the Lena Hall Library. And the aim of the project was to use archives and museum collections to improve cross-community relations and bring reconciliation to the place here. Border Sounds was one of the 30 projects that I delivered for PRONI and the Nerve Center during Making the Future. Most of our projects focus on either uncovering stories from the archives or bringing new stories into PRONI's archives. Border Sounds focus on the latter, bringing border stories into PRONI, and we chose VR as the format for 2 reasons. First, because when going through Irish cinema, we found that the border has not really featured as much as, for example, prisons and male paramilitarism have, and we could also not find any other VR film that really focus on the Irish border. Secondly, after making short films, trail maps, websites, photography, time capsules, you name it, absolutely every type of media that is out there, we thought that it was a bit like time to experiment with VR technology. So on this slide here, you can see the small team behind it, myself there on the left as the creative producer for the project. Beside me is Jude Mullen, who was our creative media trainer from the Nerve Center. And in the middle there, giving the thumbs up, is Lindsay Gillespie, who is an archivist at PRONI. So before we started recruiting people online via an open call, we set out some parameters for the project. The approach for Border Sounds would be participatory. That meant that the stories would come from the participants, and they would be asked to pick a spot, record sounds associated with that spot, and then write and record a haiku poem about it. And the team would be responsible for filming and editing. And the participants, of course, were invited to join us at their chosen spot if they wanted to get a bit of experience and see how filming in 360 degrees work. The maximum length for the film would be between 10 to 12 minutes, and an observational documentary style would be adopted. And each spot will have 1 or 2 360 images, providing sort of like a fly on the wall view of the chosen spots. So viewers would be able to look in any direction, hear the sounds, but there wouldn't be any moving around in the virtual space. 21 people from all walks of life and areas near the border joined us in April 2021 for 6 evening workshops. We worked with amazing external facilitators who provided training in VR filmmaking, haiku poem writing, and sound recording on a smartphone. And after the workshops, the participants submitted their content, and we brought in an editor to help us turn all of that content into the 11-minute film. You can now watch it online. So I would like to finish this presentation with some reflections on the process of making border sounds. The first one is in relation to VR's sense of presence, allowing viewers to look in any direction, hear the sounds, but still be very much like passive observers with no ability to move around in the virtual space. helped us keep the project feasible and overcome a couple of limitations. The first one was in relation to time. We had a month to film at 21 chosen spots across 300 miles, while we were very busy running other projects as well for Making the Future. The budget was super tight, and that meant that both myself, Jude, and Lindsay had to do all the filming ourselves. We couldn't outsource it to an external company. And also as a result of that, we had limited access to equipment. We only had 2 360 cameras and also tripods. And we had our own skill set. So none of us were VR filmmakers. Both myself and Jude have made films before. Lindsay is an archivist who was learning the art of filmmaking as well. So for us, yes, we had to overcome our own skills set. But luckily, audience feedback shows that just looking around was enough to create this sense of presence, which normally and generally is sort of like VR's main sort of like selling point. Viewers said that they really felt that they were there standing on this invisible border while engaging with the film. Now I want to say a few words about the participatory approach to filmmaking. The approach turned the participants into co-authors of the film, as they were the ones who decided what stories would feature in the film, limiting their tasks to selecting only one spot, telling us exactly where they wanted us to place that camera, writing a haiku poem, which is a very, very short form of writing, and selecting a few sounds associated with that place, enabled us to not only make the tasks doable for absolutely everyone, but also to keep the film under the desired length of 10 to 12 minutes, which is normally considered the ideal length for any VR film. The online nature of the project enabled us to recruit a wide range of participants and actually proved to be the right model when working with people that are so spread across the country. Had the project been delivered in person in Belfast or Derry, perhaps many would have not even joined it for different reasons: geographical distance, financial, or even health. And the stories probably wouldn't be as diverse as they ended up being in the film. More diversity in the room also means more diversity of stories on screen, which is a brilliant thing for post-conflict storytelling projects. Also, we focus on the power of space, and as a result, on what unites people, that is, their memories of border life that their chosen spot has triggered, rather than what separated them, what side in Northern Ireland's troubled history they belong to. And research has shown that storytelling can contribute to transcending differences in post-conflict societies. It offers opportunities to reimagine contested spaces and interact with opposing perspectives, particularly when we hear stories from people's own voices. There is a lot of good research around this. I would strongly recommend anyone to read Jolene Mayer's and Cathal McLaughlin's work on post-conflict storytelling in Northern Ireland. You're going to see lots of examples about the benefits of participatory methods. So I have no doubt that when VR harnesses the power of digital engagement to reach out to a wider range of contributors and focuses on commonalities, its immersive potential can add so much to current efforts by traditional sort of like storytelling projects in post-conflict societies. Despite these potentials, there are also, of course, some challenges when making participatory VR films in a sensitive context. Firstly, you must make your participants aware of the importance of safe online practice when interactions are happening entirely through Zoom. It's also important to make participants aware of their ethical, moral, and legal obligations as co-creators of content. Any lack of sensibility in these projects can actually exacerbate rather than reconcile difference. Secondly, you must consider the well-documented paradoxical power of storytelling to heal trauma or to open old wounds. Despite the positive results of many storytelling projects, one still cannot assume that speaking out will always be positive and unproblematic. So when asking people to share a story about a place of memory, there's always the risk of re-traumatization, both by those who are sharing the stories, but also by those who are listening, engaging with the VR film. So now I want to talk a little bit about access and distribution. While the VR format enabled the film to offer a unique and immersive on-screen experience of the Irish border, access and distribution proved to be a bit of a barrier in assessing the film's potential in post-conflict storytelling. Access to VR technology for both producers and consumers remains limited despite the drop in hardware and software prices. So for filmmakers, producing high quality, immersive content requires substantial levels of expertise, skills, and technical infrastructure, and therefore remains quite expensive for a lot of people. For users, although free VR content can now be easily accessible via YouTube and other apps, devices such as the Oculus Rift is still quite expensive. Border Sounds was shown publicly twice in September and November of 2021. Both events were held actually when Making the Future, and of course its funding was coming to an end. So even if more time was allocated to distribution, screening VR films is not that simple. VR cannot travel as easily as films, and its return of investment is not great either. So for example, while 20 or 200 people can sit and watch a film through the same projection system at the same time, VR requires a headset and an operating system for each viewer, which makes it quite costly for organizers to set up as an event for only a few people to benefit. So it's a very individual experience. And as a temporary funded project, taking Border Sounds to film festivals once the project was over was also off limits, because most festivals charge an entry fee, and with the project over, we didn't have any money to spend anymore. So the story would have been probably a little bit different if Border Sounds was a traditional sort of like linear film, because any request to show it could be promptly met, as most venues nowadays have basic screening equipment and they don't require sort of like robust, tech support. Also, there are more film festival options that, particularly those that don't charge any entry fees as well. So with limited time and mobility, we shared Border Sounds online, and you can find it now if you go to the YouTube channel for the Nerve Center. And despite having over 600 views, which is a much higher figure than a couple of in-person events would have achieved, I believe that we missed the opportunity to fully use the film's immersive feature as a tool to promote much needed conversations about the border, but also to assess its potential in societies emerging out of conflict. So the last thing I want to discuss is the preservation of VR content. As mentioned earlier, the aim of Border Sounds was not just to offer space for people to come together to make a VR film, but also to bring border stories into PRONI's archives. The film has been added to PRONI's catalog, and while the film is currently being safely stored in their servers, there is no guarantee that there will be adequate technology to play back the content 50 years, 100 years from now. With the constant flux of equipment, hardware, and software, it's still unknown whether this digital immersive present will be available for future generations. And I think this quote here captures really, really well this fragility. Digital documents last forever, or 5 years, whoever comes first. So it is a bit worrisome. So wrapping up this presentation, I demonstrated how virtual reality was used to bring people from different backgrounds together to share stories about border life and create an immersive experience about it. And I would like to wrap up with these 3 takeaways from the project. The first one is, while traditional filmmaking has become more accessible to diverse creators, basically today, anyone with a good story, access to a smartphone, and basic knowledge of filming and editing can actually make a very good film. But the immersive world has yet to catch up. There are still many limitations on who can actually participate in this new medium. As a storytelling format with immersive capabilities, I strongly believe that VR can be an important mechanism for conflict transformation, but more experiments with proper time and resources allocated to distribution and assessment is needed to fully understand this potential. Lastly, if there is one takeaway from Making Border Sounds, it is to not let technology obfuscate the potential of the story. With so many possibilities out there, we can kind of become too driven by technology, get easily carried away by current trends, and end up sort of losing track of the people and their narratives. So story first, technology second. That's what I would say if there is one takeaway to take from this presentation. So this is a slide with some references used in this presentation, but also with some recommended reading if you want to learn more about Northern Ireland, borders. And this is my contact detail if you want to get in touch. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.